Let's get started. So I'm Jack Petranker. I'm the senior teacher here at the Center for Creative Inquiry. And I've been doing this for a long time. This is, when I say this, I mean the Center for Creative Inquiry, which has been around since the year 2000. But even going back before that, the reason that the Center for Creative Inquiry was founded, you could say, the inspiration for it, was a series of books that were published by Tartang Tulku, who's a Tibetan Lama, starting in 1977. And I was around in those days. I wasn't actively involved, but pretty quickly I became actively involved. And those books and that vision, which is called the Time, Space, Knowledge Vision, like in this poster up here, is not Buddhist. Tartang Tulku has always been very clear about that. He doesn't even like to say it's a teaching he developed. It's more like things came together, and he saw the opportunity of presenting some things that he thought were important in a way that might work well for Westerners. So the Center for Creative Inquiry was established to try to expand that out. And as I said, it's been there since the year 2000, but we haven't really had a place of our own, CCI has not, until June of last year, when this building became available. And so we're excited about the possibilities, and we are offering talks and workshops and the like. And this is one in that series, basically. So today we're talking about time. We're talking about the future. When I started studying the Time, Space, Knowledge Vision, as we call it, the TSK vision, when I started studying that, my main focus or my main interest, the place I naturally felt at home, was with space, not so much time. And Tartang Tulku actually says in one of the books about that vision, he says some people are naturally drawn to space, some to time, some to knowledge. But what I've found, especially in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, is that I've gotten very interested in time. I think it's it's not that I wasn't interested before, but I started to, I think, realize more of the potential there. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, and we will do some very short practices as part of the presentation here today. But it turns out that if you understand time differently, and the way that I've described that in the title of the talk is Unfreezing the Future, right? If you unfreeze the future, or you could even just say unfreeze time, because we tend to freeze time, and I'll be talking about what I mean by that. We tend to freeze time. If we don't do that, if we let the dynamic of time really come alive in our experience, then our experience is transformed. So that's the basic approach that I'm going to be exploring here. It's something that seems especially relevant or valuable now because we live in such difficult times. You know, we live in a moment when a lot of the things we thought were well established and secure, you could say, are being called into question. That's true politically, it's true in terms of the climate, it's true in terms of the world order. Time is problematic in a way that it really hasn't been before. Now, when Tartang Tulku wrote Time, Space, Knowledge, that first book, which was in 1977, he said, well, you know, time's kind of problematic anyway because we feel that it bears down on us, you know, we don't have control over it. But now that seems to be especially an issue, and I will talk about that a little bit, maybe more toward the end of what we're doing here today. So the way we usually think about time is in terms of past, present, future, right? And it's a linear way of understanding time. Past is, well, from my perspective, let me do it from your perspective. The past is over here, and the present is here, and the future is here, and we move along this line of time, right? From the past to the present to the future. Now, that's a way of thinking that really centers the past. We like to think, or we usually think, that what's at the center of time is the present, right? Past, present, future. But that doesn't make so much sense. I mean, it's a helpful way to think about it. Seems to be, to us, a natural way to think about it. But if you think about it, the past, the present, let me say, it's not something we can ever take hold of, right? If you say, well, the present is what's going on, and sometimes people will say, well, the only thing that's real is the present, because the past is gone, right? So it's not real. And the future hasn't arrived yet, so it's not real. So only the present is real. But then you come up against this problem that the present is not something we can ever really take hold of. The moment we start to look for the present, it's already gone. So that structure of past, present, future is kind of problematic. And the other thing that's problematic about it is that when we try to make sense of this linear structure, we're leaving out what seems to be kind of the main thing, which is the way that we somehow get from the past to the present to the future. Right? There's this movement, but nobody really understands. And I really mean that, I think, literally. I mean, there are a lot of philosophers who spend their professional careers thinking about this, and they have theories, but nobody really understands. What's you could say, the mechanism, although that's not so interesting to me, but what's the mechanism by which we get from the past to the present to the future? It's kind of this big mystery. So our usual understanding is a little bit problematic. And what I've been suggesting is what I said a minute ago, and I'm going to continue to say that, is that when we think about time in that way, it's really a past-centered way of thinking. Because what the past is good at is assigning identity. We say, this happened. Think of your own identity. You say, well, who am I? You say, well, and then the answer that you give is, I'm such and such a person, these parents, this location, these things happened to me, this is who I am. It tends to be very past-centered. Now, maybe we have plans also, and we can include that. But it tends to be very past-centered because it is so focused on identity. And that's a kind of a characteristic of the past. So I'm going to be talking more about the future, and I'll kind of go back and forth between the two. But it's also possible to put the future at the center. And if you do, things look very different, because the thing about the future is that it doesn't have any identity. You can't ever say anything about the future. It's just possibility. It's just, you can predict things about the future, but when you do that, you're kind of giving it an identity. It's a kind of past-centered way of coming at the future. The future itself is just sheer possibility. Could be. In the next moment, anything could happen. We make predictions, and in a lot of ways, most of the time, on most kinds of things, we're right. But then, of course, things happen that we're completely unprepared for. And we see that, I remember just last week, looking at whatever place I looked to first to get my news, and suddenly seeing that somebody had been shot and killed in Minneapolis. It was completely unexpected. The future produces things that we don't know how to allow for. You could say, well, it was predictable that something like that might happen, but the actuality of what happened, until it happened and became the past, right? Until it got its identity, it was just possibilities. It didn't have any existence at all. So putting the future at the center is very, very different. Now you're living in a world in which you don't know what's happening next. Right? Now that's a problem for us usually, because for reasons that I'll say something about now and then something a little bit later, it's a problem because we don't feel comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen. Right? We want to be in control. The self, and the self is kind of an important actor here, because the self is one of those things that has identity, and in that way you could say the self is also past-centered. Right? Again, who am I? We have an answer for that, and the answer is all about the past. Mostly about the past. But we want to be in control. The self wants to be in control. We want to make the future fit a model that we already have in place. And of course, the easiest place to see that is in terms of clock time, right? So we say, we're meeting right now. I hope in a little while I will engage you more, but right now I'm busy talking. That'll happen, that'll keep on happening until we get to 6:30, and then more or less at that time we'll stop, right? So that's a prediction we make about the future. It's a model we have. And clock time is very much about giving order and structure to the future, but it's kind of a dodge, that's not really the future. That's just something it's an overlay that we put on the arising of the future so that we feel like we're in control. And it works, It's like, I've been thinking about this for some reason lately. It's like the way that we put, the way that we paint stripes on the road, and then we follow those stripes, or there are traffic signs, or, we sort of give order to the situation. We don't just, I used to go to India fairly often, and I always had the feeling in India that the basic rule for driving in India was that you were entitled to every possible inch of road that you could, that nobody else had taken, But here, no, we've sort of laid down this order. We've tried to make it predictable. And that's what we do with time also, and especially with the future. We try to make it conform to a structure that we impose. And that's useful for a lot of purposes. You came here around 5 o'clock because you knew that that's when the talk was starting. And so, sure, that way of working with time is very useful, but it doesn't really tell us anything about the future. It just tells us about a structure, a tool that we've developed to work with the future. So the idea that the future is unknown, that it can't, in principle, you can never know the future, is problematic when we're worried about the future. And again, if we look at our situation right now, we say, well, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, that's very agitating if you really get into it, right? Or maybe you worry about the future in the sense that you say, well, I can see where this is going, and it's not good. That's making predictions about the future. But a lot of the time, we worry that if we can't control what's going to happen, or if there isn't some mechanism for controlling what's going to happen, it might go in some direction that we really don't like, that we really don't want. Right? So we wind up trying to make the future like the past. And the way that I think about that is we put the past at the center. Right? The center of our experience is the way things have been. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, I'm usually the oldest person in the room these days. But back when there were only 3 networks of television, there was a news broadcaster who was on CBS named Walter Cronkite. And Walter Cronkite was very popular and much beloved. People trusted him. That was back when people trusted the news, right? When he ended his news broadcast every night, he would say, "And that's the way it is." And that's kind of what we try to do. We say, okay, I've given you the news, now you know, I've made order, you know, it's like he was kind of doing that for us. He was saying, that's the way things are. Don't worry, you know, we've got it all figured out. You know? And that's kind of what we would like to do with what's happening. And if we can't do that, it's troubling, it's scary. And we can't do it, you know, and we see that today. That's what the situation is that we face today, where we don't know what's going to happen politically. We don't know what's going to happen on many different levels. And probably in your own life, you know, maybe it's not urgent, maybe it is, but maybe there's something going on that is, you know, it's happening, but you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know where it's going to lead. So the future always has this kind of sense that it's not something that we can control. But what I'm going to suggest is that we can allow the future to be what it is. We don't have to control it. And for some purposes, it's good to control it, you know. Clocks and calendars and things like that is a kind of control, or at least it's a way of putting the future, kind of putting it in a corral, right? And you say, okay, that part I get. I can make that work. But the aspects of the future where it's unknown, where it's just sheer possibility, that's not problematic in itself. We make it problematic when we try to control it. So that's really what I want to be suggesting today, is that if we don't put the past at the center, if we put the future at the center instead, we open up the possibility of freedom. When we're working with the past, when we're relying on the structures and the identities and the mechanisms that the past puts in place, we're giving up a kind of innate freedom or natural freedom that we have. But if we let the future be at the center, then we can rediscover that sense of freedom. So the question is, how do we do that? Well, you know, I talked about the TSK vision, the time-space knowledge vision. So there's like 6 books in that series, and they all talk about time, and they all talk about different ways to work with time. So there's lots and lots of possibilities. You know, there's many ways to open up to the freedom that the future offers us. But I'm going to suggest a short practice, and we're going to do this several times. And when I say short, I mean really short, just like we'll do it for a minute or so. And we'll do it several times over the course of the next hour. And it's just really straightforward. The practice is to put the future at the center. Or another way of saying that, maybe a better way to say that, is to welcome the future, to let it arrive. Like in this very moment, here we are, and now the future is arriving, and now the future is arriving, and now the future is arriving. It's always arriving, right? Just welcome it. Just let it be there. Just let the future arrive. Don't try to change anything. Don't try to do anything about it. Don't try to turn it in a certain direction. Just let the future arrive, or arise is another way you could say that. It's just as it is. So let's do that just for a minute, and we won't say anything about it this time. I want you to kind of get used to the idea. So let's just do it for a minute. Let the future arise. Okay. So as I say, we won't say anything about that now, but next time we do it, I'll invite you to reflect on that or ask questions about it. One thing I'll say about it right now is it's nothing special, right? The future is always arising. We're just giving ourselves permission to tune into it. So, let me go back to the past and how we usually structure things, how we're really kind of committed to the past. And as I was thinking about how to present that, I thought of an experience I had. It's a story I tell from time to time. Something that happened, a long time ago. I was meeting with a group of people with Tartung Tulku. We call him Rinpoche. That's the title of respect that we give him. So this was a group of people meeting together with Rinpoche, and we were talking about what we could do to support his project, something like that. And there was a fellow in that group whom I just barely knew. His name was Tony. And I felt that Tony was being kind of overbearing, like he was taking control of the meeting, you know, he was sort of asserting himself too strongly. And at a certain point, I spoke up and I said, you know, I don't remember what I said, it was a long time ago. But I said something like, you know, it bothers me the way he's doing this. It seems to be interfering with what we're trying to do, something like that. And Rinpoche said, change places, you be him. And I took a deep breath and I got ready to do it, and I couldn't do it. I just could not become my version of Tony. You know, it was just too far away from my sense of who I was. You know, my self-image, you could say, my identity, my past, what I had built up. Right? And that's how it is for us. A lot of the time, we really are committed to being who we are, to letting ourselves be shaped by the past that we have. I'm going to take a little break here and ask if someone could close the door, because it is pretty cold. We do have the heat on, but let's not make it work harder than it needs to. Thank you. So that way of sort of positioning ourselves in terms of the past, you know, what has brought us up to this, our own self-image, our own identity, we do that all the time, really much more than we imagine, or much more than we realize, until you start to get interested in time or in this kind of inquiry. Or, you know, I'm not saying we have a monopoly on that way of understanding. I mean, psychology, a lot of psychology is based on understanding, therapy is based on understanding the past that has brought you to a particular place and perhaps rethinking it or reimagining it or something like that. But we do it all the time. And the kinds of things that I have in mind are, you start to think about something, and then there's this little voice which maybe we don't even notice. Most of the time, probably, we don't even notice it. It says, no, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to think about something else. You don't think about that. That's a waste of time. Or don't think about that. You're not supposed to think about that. Or you don't think about that. You're supposed to be thinking. You're supposed to be doing something else. That kind of thing. Or we say, oh, that was wrong. You shouldn't have done that. These are the kinds of things we say to ourselves all the time. Right? And that's letting the past be in control. That's putting the past at the center. And it comes up in another way if you find yourself in a situation where the way things you thought were going to go don't go that way, and then you're frustrated. Like let's say you want to write an email and before lunch, let's say. And then something comes up, you get a phone call, and now you can't finish the email before lunch, and so you're frustrated. Right? Well, that's because you had a certain version of how you thought things were going to be. Right? You had created a future that isn't going to, it didn't turn out that way, and so you feel frustrated. Or now, let's say you're going down to lunch. I do this every day over at Mangalam, because we have lunch together. So it's time for lunch. And then this happened the other day. I started going downstairs and someone said, oh, lunch is delayed by 15 minutes. Well, as it turned out that time, I thought, oh, good, I have 15 minutes, I can do something else. But I could have been frustrated, right? I could have said, oh, well, wait a minute, now everything's screwed up, now I have to waste the next 15. Anyway, you see what I'm saying? We impose a plan on the future. That's our way of controlling the future. Right? That's the past's way of controlling the future. That's the self's way of controlling the future. The past and the self are very, very, very tightly connected. So you could do it differently. Right? You could just say, and in that particular case, I just remember it because I was walking downstairs and somebody said 15 minutes, and I just pivoted and went back upstairs, and it seemed, oh, okay, that was nice. That was a good way to do it, I think. So the idea is you improvise, or that's another possibility. That's a little bit more about inviting the future. Right? So you may be familiar with this kind of basic instruction that you get if you're doing improvisation, like theater improvisation, of saying yes and. You know that expression? Yeah, it's kind of well known at this point. Well, so the yes is the past, right? You accept the past, and the and is the future, because you don't know what's going to come. That's what improvisation is all about, right? So you could open up to the future in that way. And that idea of improvisation is really a good way of beginning to look at how the future, you can put the future at the center. So, or it's like, let's say you're playing basketball, or I don't play basketball, but I watch basketball sometimes. So a team draws up a play, right? And that's the past. It's like, okay, like there's a timeout, and the coach draws up a play and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. So now you're getting ready to control the future. But then, you inbound the ball, and something is different, so there's a possibility that opens up that you didn't see before, so you improvise, right? You're not bound by the past. You're not forced to do that, right? You sort of welcome what's possible. So again, that may not sound so attractive. It sounds good to improvise. It sounds, if you're a basketball player and you say, okay, this is how we win ball games. We're ready to take advantage of what the situation presents, There's a saying that they say, that they have in basketball sometimes, where they say, let the game come to you. And I think that's a way of talking about, let the future be available for you. You don't go into it knowing what's going on. You let the game show up. But sometimes it's just scary. Sometimes, scary, this is too strong a word to say scary, but sometimes you may have had this experience. You wake up, let's say it's Sunday, it's a day off, and you wake up, and you don't know what you're going to do. Like you don't have any plans, and it feels a little uncomfortable. People kind of get depressed sometimes, like on vacation too, if they don't already have some plans. So people make plans because they don't want to be in that situation. They don't want to be in a situation where they don't know what's going to happen next. They want to be in control. That's the past speaking. You could also let the future speak, you could say. You could unfreeze the future. So one way of thinking about that is that instead of thinking that you are your past, your identity, you could say, well, no, you're the future, your possibilities. So let's try again now. Let's go ahead and do that same exercise, and we'll also do it again for a minute, maybe 2 minutes, if we're daring. So the practice again is just let the future arise. Here's the future, here's the future. I can't say that fast enough, right? Because the future is always arising. It's not just 5 seconds, it's not just 1 second. It's like the future is just a steady stream of arising. So let the future arise. Welcome it. Don't try to change it. We'll see where that takes us. Okay. So, what's your name?
My name is Esperanza.
Esperanza? Okay, good. So we've been talking about, that's a nice name for talking about the future. We have been talking about how we usually structure our lives in terms of the past. We let the past control us. And if we focus instead on the possibilities of the future, which is always arising and never determined, we gain access to a kind of freedom. So we were just doing a little practice, just kind of straight ahead, say, okay, what happens if we let the future arise? Not trying to control it, not doing anything else. And I'm telling you what that practice was because we'll do it again. So you'll have a chance. It's okay. So one way to think about the relationship between the future and the past is to say that the past is the body of time and the future is the aliveness of time. The past is the body of time and the future is the aliveness of time. And if we let the past be what controls us, then we lose that aliveness. We know that when we find ourselves acting out routines. We do the same thing. that's a kind of an obvious example of how we can lose the aliveness of time. But a lot of the time we're just kind of, how can I say this? I don't want to make it sound too negative. We're so involved with making sure we understand and can control what's going on that we don't let ourselves actually experience what's going on. So another way to say that, so I said the past is the body of time and the future is the aliveness of time. Another way to say that is that the past is existence and the future is experience. The past is existence and the future is experience. And I suppose one way to think about that is to say that things like chairs and cushions and so on exist. They don't have a future. I mean, of course, they're going to continue existing, but there's nothing about their existence that gives them a future. But people are different. We have futures. We act into the future. And that's where experience comes alive. Now, a lot of the time, we don't really experience, you know. And what I'm thinking of, I said before, just routines, basic routines. That's an obvious example. But it's also true when we're doing something and we really are just not aware of what it is that we're doing. Right? I mean, it's like a routine, but it's a little bit more pervasive than that, because a lot of the time we're acting out our model of what's going on. We're telling a story about what's going on, instead of just going on. And that, again, is the past taking over, putting the past at the center instead of putting the future at the center. So I want to give an example that is maybe helps us specify that a little bit. So let's say you're working on something, you're doing something, you have a project, whatever it is, and it has a deadline, or you just need to finish it in a certain length of time. And a friend calls up and says, let's go to a movie. So either you say yes or you say no, right? Either you go to the movie or you keep doing the project. And it doesn't, for our purposes, it doesn't matter which choice you make. The question is, how do you make that decision? Well, one way would be to say, let the future arise. Somebody who used to teach these TSK teachings that this is based on, used to say, let's see what time presents. And for a long time I thought that was a little bit too much jargon, like sort of too tightly focused on what TSK is about. Tom Morse, for those of you who knew him, he's passed away. But I've come to realize that's actually a pretty good way of thinking about it. Like, you know, your friend calls you up, invites you to the movie. What's going on in that moment? You know, what future arises? I mean, maybe you say, well, let me think about it. Or maybe you just say, oh, okay, let's go. Or maybe you say, no, I can't. You know, there's only a few possibilities. But whatever it is, you could approach it in terms of your model, your self-image, your sense of what you care about or what matters. You could tell yourself a story about it, or you could just let the future arise. Now, it sort of sounds like letting the future arise means yeah, sure, let's go to a movie, you know. It's like, that sounds a little bit more free and spontaneous. But it could be that the spontaneous thing is to stay and finish your project, stay and finish what you're doing. It's not a question of having to decide. It's not a question of having to impose some model. That would all be centered on the past. It's just the possibility that you can let the future arise, and that's enough. You don't have to take control. You know? It's a different way of going through life, you could say. Years ago, I've never really been a skier, but I've tried skiing a few times. And they used to say, or somebody said this to me once anyway, and it stuck with me. They said, don't steer. When you're on your skis and you're going down a slope, kind of let the slope determine where you're going. It's a little bit like what I said about basketball. Let the game come to you. Right? When you try to steer, that's the past. That's trying to be in control. Right? So let's try the practice again. I forgot to ask you for your reactions last time, so let's do it this time. And so the practice is very simple. It's just letting the future arise. And we're just doing it for a minute or two. We're sort of seeing, is that different from the way we usually experience? That's all. Okay, let's do that for a minute. Okay. So now, finally, you get a chance to say something. Tell me, what have you noticed as you explore this idea that the future just arises and is always arising and doesn't have anything fixed or established about it? Yeah, Julia.
It seemed that allowing the future to just come was inseparable from what happens in the space in terms of sounds and what I might be looking at any one moment. And I also experienced some of the same kind of unity of me with the objects of my perception.
Mhm.
And it wasn't so much led by I am perceiving these things,
Mhm.
but rather things are happening in this space, and whatever I am is a part of that kind of feeling.
Mhm. Yeah, that's nicely described. It seems to me is there's an openness to what happens. Okay, good.
I found
Mark?
that if I allowed the future to arise, or the important thing was not to have a judgment, or if the judgment went away, then it was easier, and it kind of just came in. And I think my habitual way of thinking is everything is a judgment that's going on in your mind as
Mhm.
everything arises. You're judging everything. You don't even really realize you're doing it, but
Mhm.
all through the day, that's all kind of do.
Right.
And this is kind of right. Okay, so put the judgment down for a second and see what's really out there.
Mhm.
That's what hit me.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Yeah, because if you think about the structure of a judgment, somebody is judging something, right? And so there is a somebody, and who is that somebody? Well, it's somebody who's been constituted by the past. You know? Like it's your self-image. So you're really affirming the past whenever you make a judgment. If you drop the judgments, then you can let the experience arise. You can let the future arise. Good. Anybody else?
I felt there was a lot more texture to the experience, kind of movement and texture came in, because when I'm letting the past, it's like I've already taken a snapshot and I'm holding the image of everything and so to let go of that kind of constant imposition of what the past is holding as already here,
Mm-hmm.
it made a lot of fine texture of the little variations in sound and
Mm-hmm.
all of those things came much more forward.
Yeah, that's good. That's right. That's another way we have of trying to control experience. Right? We tell ourselves what it is, and so then we lose it. We lose the texture. I think that's a nice word. And the future kind of returns to us the texture of our experience, you could say. Yeah, so Ellen.
I'm so curious because I was thinking a lot about space too, and immediately I recognize the similarity in that experience of space and then thinking of time in that way too. So I'm really curious how eventually all these things fit together. Knowledge now too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
To do part 2, part 3 soon, but and underneath all of it, very aware of this. I think that there has to be this, experience of trust somewhere too. And I was really aware of that, where you can trust experience to some degree. Trust.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mhm.
underlies, I think, a lot of it. That ability. You don't, why you're judging all the time is you don't quite trust, that's going to turn out the way you want it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the thing about the self is that I've said before, we want to be in control, and I think that's definitely one way to think about what's happening. But there's also this sense that the self is kind of a construct. It's something we've learned to put together, and one of the things we know about the self is that it exists. But in fact, it doesn't. It's just a construct. And so we're always a little bit on guard, right? It always makes us unsure of ourselves. And so we don't, every experience could be a challenge that we don't know how to meet, so we don't trust the experience. I mean, there are other reasons not to trust, but yeah. And sure, time and space and knowledge, Rinpoche, when he talks about the TSK vision, at some points he says, they're facets of being. You know? So they're not separate from each other, but they're very fundamental. I mean, why does he talk about those three? He just says, well, those are the basics of our experience. You know? Things happen in time and in space, and knowledge makes them available. That's pretty much, you can't get started without that, you know.
Knowledge makes time and space available?
Yeah. I mean,
I guess I don't understand the way knowledge is being used.
mm-hmm. Well, how would you think about knowledge? What would you say something about how you understand knowledge?
Well, I understand it sort of in relation to wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And knowledge has to do more with the, left brain and control and
Yeah.
the information
Right.
that then processes and does something with,
Right.
rather than maybe what we would think of as an intuitive
Mm-hmm.
wisdom, kind of a non-dual experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so no, when Rinpoche talks about wisdom, knowledge, it's more a kind of knowingness. That's a word that he uses. It's not the information, the sort of facts, the stuff that ChatGPT gives us, It's a kind of an openness to experience. It's the potential for knowing. And people have asked sometimes, in the German translation of TSK, there was a question that came up because there are two words in German for knowledge. And the kind of ordinary one seemed like it was, in some ways seemed right, but then it left out the other one, which is more like on the level of wisdom or a deeper knowing. And I can't quite remember how they resolved it, but so in German there were two words. For us, both those things are going on when you talk about knowledge, but he's definitely pointing toward this possibility of a knowing, of knowing it all. And so what is there to know? Well, it's what arises in time and presents itself in space, you could say. So that's how the three are facets of being. But sometimes people find it easier to use the word knowing or knowingness or knowledgeability. He uses all those words.
Would the term direct perception?
Well, perception raises a lot of questions. So, I mean, one of the things about perception is that the way we understand it usually is somebody's perceiving something. And so already you've bought into a certain structure, right? You've created a certain distance that has to be bridged between the one who perceives and what's perceived. So, although he talks about perception, certainly, for our purposes this evening, I'd stay away from it. Okay. Okay, good. Well, that's nice to hear. I mean, it's nice to see you engaging these issues, and they're very fundamental issues, and they're not so difficult to come into contact with. That's one of the nice things about, I think, the TSK vision. But it's a nicer way to say that is it's one of the things about what it means to be a human being. These questions are really just available. They're right there the moment we decide to look. And it's one of the reasons that I really love these teachings is because I have a traditional Buddhist practice too, and that's very valuable to me. But this seems so simple and immediately available. The questions are just right there. The moment you look. Okay, well, I want to take an example now that is that comes out of the politics of our current situation, because I think it kind of helps illuminate well, two things. One is I think it illuminates what we're talking about, and the other is because we are in a situation where I think a lot of people feel like, what can we do? What's the right response? So maybe this kind of inquiry can be helpful. So I want to give you a very direct example. I'm going to quote somebody. So this was something I read in the paper, or read online. I guess we don't really have papers so much anymore. It was a bishop in New Hampshire, and he was. I think it came up in the context of a service that was held in honor of Renee Good, a memorial service. And he was saying that the clergy have a certain responsibility. And he said, I see, I'm going to quote now, he says, I see people with guns in New Hampshire. Of course, there wasn't so much going on in New Hampshire, but he was saying, well, okay, but how should we think about this? I see people with guns in New Hampshire. This is an open carry state, and it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a feeling of security and safety. But does that mean I shouldn't show up? I don't think so. I think it means I go, and I should be prepared for whatever happens. And that is exactly what we've been talking about. It's just welcoming the future. You're prepared for whatever happens. You don't have it worked out in advance. Of course, you prepare in the sense, like the people who are acting as observers in Minnesota, they go through a training to do that. You prepare, and you don't pretend that you can just be kind of spontaneous, like, or whatever. But you're prepared for whatever happens. And I think that is what it means to be open to the future instead of relying on the past. That's what it means to live in the future. Whatever happens, you're prepared. Right? You're ready. And usually it's not a life or death kind of thing. You're not facing people with guns, You're not stuck in that kind of a situation. But the same thing comes up, Your friend says, let's go to the movies. You're prepared. You're accepting the future. Okay? You're unfreezing the future, or you could even say you're unfreezing time. Right? That possibility is there. You could say you're putting every moment you're putting the whole of your experience on the line. You're putting it up for grabs in a sense. You're ready to go with whatever comes next. It sounds maybe a little scary, but it's not. Well, maybe sometimes it is. And then you're scared, that's what comes up. That's what the future presents. Because the future is not just things coming in from outside. The future is also what's going on for you in your experience. That's what you work with. You're working with the dynamic of time, and you're not trying to navigate your life on the basis of the past, on the basis of your identity, right? On the basis of your story about who you are. You're ready to let go of all of that. Yeah.
So being ready for anything, part of that is interoception, they're calling it these days. In other words, which also changes moment to moment. The choice, whatever choice you make with regard to your friend who wants to go to the movies, will probably have something to do with what is arising within. This idea that we accept whatever happens. I can accept that idea as long as it includes what's happening within me. Otherwise, it seems like there's absolutely no direction. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that's what you're implying. Or, you know,
Mhm. Well, I'm not quite sure how you connect the last thing you said with what you were saying before, but let me just go with the first part, and maybe that'll help clarify it. Sure. Part of what's happening in the future, as I said just a minute ago, actually, it's not like it's just coming in from outside. Your experience is the whole of your experience, and the way that we tend to make a distinction between inside and outside, for instance, is just a story that we tell ourselves, right? I mean, it's useful in some context to be able to make that distinction, of course, but it's all just grist for the mill, as Ram Dass used to say many years ago. It's all equally a part of what's arising. So yeah, you could think in terms of interoception. I think that has more to do with body sensations, right, internally, but whatever.
say the whole thing.
Okay, the whole mind-body complex, let's say, mind-body perception complex, or however you want to say that. Yeah, it's all up for grabs. It's all available.
So I'm not necessarily the mill and everything out there is the grist.
Right.
It could be that maybe that's the mill and I'm the grist.
Uh-huh. Yeah, right. That's right. Or maybe there isn't a mill and it's just all grist, right? Right. Yeah. Very true. Very true. So let's go ahead and practice a little more. Oh, sure.
Like, I'm not sure I quite get the prepared for anything kind of,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're prepared, there's some level of intention.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead.
I would think.
That was it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is that what you meant? What do you mean by prepared?
Well, there is. I mean, I think that there is an intention. That if you look at what's going on in our situation, we are always living forward, and there is an intention there.
To welcome the future.
Yeah, to welcome the future. That's right. And it's not like, there are things you care about, and that's part of interoception, right? So that plays into it. So there is something in the future. So let's go ahead and do a practice. And it's going to be along the lines of what you were suggesting, Mark. Let the future arise and be very sensitive to when you're making judgments or saying, oh, this is good, this is bad, I'm doing it right, I'm not doing it right, am I doing it right? All those things, it's also just part of what's going on, but don't let it shape what's going on, okay? Okay. So I suppose that goes right back into the issue of interoception in this broader sense. What did you find? Or Mark, I'm going to ask you, since you raised the issue earlier.
Well, I found that it's not only judgments, it's thoughts as well that are constantly interfering.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, as soon as you go to thought, the future kind of disappears. And it's only the thought takes over, and that's like the past. And it's very hard to keep the thought down, or, I mean, not that you want to suppress it, but it's just like, I'm so used to thinking all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just the way it is. It's hard.
So it's interesting, there's an interesting relationship between thinking and thought. So you think, and then the outcome of thinking is a thought, right? A thought, thought is the past tense of the verb think. So we think something, and it's a thought. And when we get caught in the content of the thought, then yes, we've lost contact with time. We've lost contact with our own experience. We've lost contact with the future. It's a very past-centered kind of thing. And yes, that's what we do. That's what our experience is like. Our experience I mean, thinking is another activity. It's like breathing, or it's the, the body breathes, the heart beats, and the mind, if you want to say that, the mind thinks. And it's okay. I mean, there's not much we can do about that. That's the way it goes. You can do. I mean, that's where meditation comes in. You can cultivate states in which thinking settles down, let's say. That's one way to do it. Or you could just be aware that thinking is an activity that's arising. You can let thinking arise without being caught in the content of the thought, without turning it into the past. But as you said, we are we're very used to thinking. It's very much a part of our experience. And so it takes a little practice to move away from that.
A lot of practice.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that's one of the very nice things about doing a practice where you say just let the future arrive, welcome the future, and you say, okay, there's some thinking going on. That's what's arising. You don't say it, of course. It's just because that would be, again, somebody steps outside the dynamic of time to say, oh, there's some thinking going on over here. No, but there is thinking going on. That's what the future, that's what time presents. Yeah. Any other comments about that?
Also the physical kind of manifestation, but there's an unburdening as that I experienced as just kind of welcome every moment and just focusing on just the moment. There's this, as you mentioned, maybe you said this grip of the past. You feel like that's a little bit big. I feel like that's a little bit big. That I find interesting. That just kind of what happens physically, a sense of like I said, unburdened.
Yeah.
From whether it's the judgments, as Mark mentioned, or thought, or whatever.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the physical dimension. The thing that you realize, if you just let experience unfold, is that you don't have a job. You don't have to do anything. You can kind of just relax, and that's the unburdening. But as I say, I'm glad you mentioned the physical side of it, because it can actually feel like a release. It sounds like that's what you're describing, right?
I also noticed, like, just trying a short meditation, and it's very, I mean, I didn't have, I could, without the thoughts going on, I was deeper, much deeper than normal. Letting that just be, that just be the meditation, just that. That's it, nothing else. It's nice.
Good.
For me, focusing on receiving the future is kind of a fast track back into awareness. I spent an awful lot of years learning how to meditate, or thinking I was meditating, and I was fighting with my thoughts. I was me against my thoughts. And so I find that this particular practice that we're doing is a very kind way of bypassing the self-flagellation.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, of course, any meditation instructor, I think, let's say, a lot of times in meditation, they will say, well, don't fight your thoughts, just let them come and let go of them. But I understand that it can feel like another thought, what am I going to do with that one, It can be sort of, it sort of feels like a struggle, right?
Yeah, and at some point when I figured out I didn't need to go through that step of
Right.
hating myself, I felt like I, wasted all this time. I could have been done
Mhm.
that maybe that was necessary.
Yeah, maybe so. And you know, the other thing to say about that is that when you reach that conclusion and you say, oh, I wasted all that time, you're giving a lot of power to the past. I mean, the past is just gone, right? You don't need to make judgments about whether you made a good use of it or not. You know, it's like, now you're in the present, so now you're in the, oh, I used that word present, because I've been talking about the future. But, you know, the present, the way I think about it, at least the way I've been thinking about it recently, is that the present is just the place where the future and the past meet. It's not anything special. It's not any separate chunk of time. Rinpoche in one of the TSK books talks about, this is a quote, he says, a silent battle for the being of time. And I think that that battle is between the past and the future. So we can let the past be in charge, and then, well, I'm not going to repeat myself, we can let the past be in charge, or we can be open to the future in this way of being that is really free. But when you're in the future, then you know, the whole idea of the past, I mean, yeah, you've got a memory of the past, you know, but it's just part of what arises. And you don't have to feel bad about it. I mean, that would be just making another judgment, you know, doing it again. So maybe you do that. It is very gentle. It's a very gentle approach, yeah. Kind of, it doesn't, it's hard to be wrong.
That's why I was saying, for me, just because it must be just the way I'm translating, I think having that sense of trusting it, you know, that trusting time, trusting space to hold all of this,
Mhm.
and we're part of it too. So you start to merge in that space too, and I think that's where that huge sense of unburdening is. We work so hard to try to manipulate everything into
Mhm.
some box that we perceive as the right, secure way to go.
Mhm.
But I think we can lean in more to the spaciousness and timeness, and maybe, I don't know, I'll stop.
Yeah, but so you've come back a couple of times to space, and you know, if this leads you into an appreciation for what shows up, which is kind of what space is about, that's great. That's fine. That may be the right way to be exploring these things, because they're all explorations. You know. I mean, we call it the Center for Creative Inquiry, and that's really what it's about, is about inquiry. It doesn't really matter, or you know, it's not so much about getting an answer to your inquiry. It's that the inquiry itself is the source of knowledge. So that goes back to your question, Julia, about what do we mean by knowledge in this context. It's the inquiry is a kind of knowing, or it's a readiness to know, a willingness to know.
So it's not a body.
It's not a body of knowledge, although Rinpoche does talk about the body of knowledge, but he means something very different by it. Yeah.
I wonder about the welcoming to the future.
Mhm.
If that is just like the beginning, like the I don't know what the right word is, preparation for it, and
Mhm.
then is there some other way of, you know, of course you can dread the future, which would not be good, but it might be okay. But I'm just saying that there might be a welcoming has this kind of opening quality to it.
Mhm.
But then after you do the practice for a little bit longer, there's just an allowing. Maybe, I don't know. I'm wondering about that welcome.
Mhm. Right. So is welcoming a kind of you see them you see the future walking up your what's the word? you know,
Come on
yeah, and you say, come on in, and then you allow, you say, take a seat and enjoy yourself. I'm not sure, I mean, I haven't thought about it that way. If it seems helpful to think about a kind of a two-step process like that, maybe allowing is a more expansive possibility. Yeah, maybe that's right. Esperanza, could you share that?
No, I said I like more the idea of allowing than welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing is like let it unfold and be there
Mm-hmm.
and be present
Mm-hmm.
with whatever is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the welcoming of the future. Is just allow it to happen.
Right,
Don't
yeah. Well, that's
push
it.
Don't hide. Don't just allow
Yeah. Well, if that,
it. Seems simple. It's not that simple, but it seems very simple.
yeah, and it actually is very simple, but we tend to make it
Very
complicated. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's why sometimes in meditative traditions and here too, we would say, there isn't anything you have to do. You just have to stop getting in the way, you could say. Yeah. And even that is saying too much, but you have to say something, so.
I think the word abiding came up in one of my TSK classes that I took many years
Mhm.
back. I like
Abiding.
that too, because it has that same kind of neutrality to it,
Mhm.
as opposed to welcoming.
Mhm.
It has some similar flavors.
Yeah. Yeah, I all of those words seem they have slightly different flavors to them, but they all are kind of shaped in the same way. It's like relax, relax into what's happening. Yeah. Yeah.
There is a word in English that I love and can be translated into Spanish, but I like to say it in English even when I'm speaking Spanish, is the unfolding. Oh, I love that word.
Unfolding, huh? Yeah.
Unfold. Just
Mhm.
look at things how they unfold, because you kind of know how things are going to unfold,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always a surprise. So it's just the unfolding. And I always have the image of this postcard that we used to buy in Rome, that they were all.
Oh yeah, right. And they sort of like,
And you, and
right.
you go, and they unfold
Right.
like.
Right, like an accordion. Mhm. Mm-hmm.
So this is the way look how it's unfolding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a nice image too. See how the future unfolds. Yeah. There's a physicist, David Bohm, who was a student or a friend of Krishnamurti's, and he was involved in these kinds of questions, and I can't remember exactly what how he used it, but he talks about space as being unenfolded. Unenfolded, so maybe that helps. I don't know. Okay, well, I just want to say a couple of more things. This way of being, it's not only an internal kind of practice. I mean, internal, external, we were saying that's not such a useful distinction to make. But what I'm thinking of now in particular is it's something to practice, to let yourself be with other people, too. You don't have to impose on them your view of who they are, right? You can welcome them, or you can let them enter. You can let them abide, or you can let them unfold, or and that's very different. I mean, we usually we have our past, and we sort of treat them as having their past, even if you don't know them. The moment, I mean, there are half of you I know, and half of you I have just met tonight for the first time. But even the people I've just met tonight for the first time, I have this kind of picture that I've formed, And you probably have formed a picture of me and the other people in the room, you know, but that's okay. You have your picture, but that's not what's going on, you know. That's just your picture. You can let the future show up in other people as well. And the same thing is true with people you work with, or maybe, you know, if you're in a position of leadership. It's like, you don't have to know in advance what's possible. There's always the possibility of something new that could unfold. I like all these different verbs. They give me a lot of ways to think about things, so that's good. I guess that's really mostly what I wanted to say. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say was, yesterday, I made my first post on Substack. So you know Substack? So it's actually under my name, but it's also I'm writing under the name Creative Inquiry. And the very first post I did was very much related to what we're talking about today, but a little more political. I talked more specifically about the situation that's going on right now in Minneapolis. So you might want to look at that, and I think what you're supposed to say in Substack, if you'd like to subscribe or you'd like to like it or whatever, that would be great.
How do you get there? Would you just put your name and Substack and then it would come up?
Yeah, I think it's the other way around, Substack/Jack Petranker, or yeah. And you'd get there, for sure. And I should mention a couple of other things that are coming up. First of all, there is going to be another talk here in Creative Inquiry on February 18th, which is about 3 weeks from now. And it's also on time, Loosening the Grip of Linear Time, the Freedom of Letting Go. So that's Ignacio teaching that. Some of you met him before. And I should also mention that although it's not Center for Creative Inquiry, next door at Mangalam Research Center, where I'm the executive director, we're going to be doing a talk where we're hosting a Buddhist scholar who's going to be talking a week from today in this same time slot. We're doing a series called Living in Hard Times. I think that's what it's called. Let me take a quick look. And the idea is, let me find it here. Sorry. How to live in hard times, examples from Buddhist lives. So he's going to be talking about a Lama who lived in, I think, the 18th century. So you might like to, tune into that. You know how to get there.
Is it going to be right here?
No, it'll be next door. Really lovely building.
Sign up online for it?
I think you can just show up. I mean, we like it if you register. You can register, but you don't have to.
Is that, you said it was the same time period?
5 to 6:30.
Okay.
Exactly.
Is it listed on the website?
It's on the well, no, that one is not. That's on the Mangalam Research website. We should probably have a link to it or something, but we don't. Okay, so there's all those things, and then I suppose I can mention, although it's kind of undefined, but I'm planning on doing probably a 3-week session, a class that would go on for 3 weeks in the spring sometime, and it would be related to TSK in some way. I haven't really decided. It's all very vague, but I would do it on Saturday mornings because there are people in Europe who are interested in these teachings, and if I do it in the morning, then they can participate.
So it's a hybrid or it's all Zoom?
No, that would be all Zoom. That wouldn't be all Zoom. So all sorts of things going on, but for today, we're done. But thank you. I really appreciate your participation, and it seems like it was helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have just one question.
Sure.
So what, is there like a little, like a way of doing this, like when you're off, I mean, it's easier here, we're sitting down, we're concentrating, but during the day. let's
Right.
say, What is there like a quick way of sort of, I mean, or is there like a little
Well-
cheat thing or something?
Well, it's not like there's a little trick, but it's available all the time,
Obviously,
right?
yeah, but it's
Um,
just remembering to do it.
yeah,
and then
right.
do it, and then doing it.
Yeah, I once in a class I was teaching, I did a little list of places you could practice it, like you're standing in line, or I call them walkabouts, things you can do while you're just walking about. I guess that's another thing I should mention is I have a book coming out in June that will touch, it's a lot about these things. It's called One with the World. Talks about space too and some other things. I think I use that. I think I have a list of walkabouts there. So, if you're not on our mailing list, you should be, and then you'll know about these things. If any of you are not.
Is this going to help me with my procrastination problem, or is this going to make it worse?
Why do you think it would make it worse?
Because if I let the future just come and I don't take care of things that I feel I should take care of, especially things that aren't particularly fun, but just sort of dreary tasks. You know where I'm going? It's just like,
Yeah, no, I think I understand, but so I procrastinate some things too. I mean, I'm good about some things, and other things I put off because I don't like to do them. But it kind of has to do with the issue of trust. I really feel like I do things in a timely way, even though I'm procrastinating. And maybe sometimes I'm wrong. Maybe sometimes I'm fooling myself, But yeah, I don't think it'll make it worse. It might make it better.
and maybe that idea that I'm procrastinating is something imposed about on a schedule, like
From the
certain
past,
things
too.
should be done by now.
And you have it's coming from the past as well. You have an image of what it is. Instead of just being open to that thing right there and there, maybe it'll be different. So,
Yeah.
could be.
Right.
Watch for judgments.
Watch for judgments, right.
It's really a lot about that, yeah.
Okay.